Professor, thank you very much indeed for your time. No doubt you watched yesterday's testimony from Minister Gordhan. What stood out for you?
Well, first of all, what you call the underwhelmed approach that was followed, which from my side, I think was exceptionally important that he did it that way. He didn't want to be sort of provocative or try to make the headlines, but rather to take the Commission systematically through his role and the way in which he understands the Treasury and the Ministry of Finance, and give them a very good understanding of the framework within which all of these things happened, and the procedures and the institutions involved, and how they were ultimately then also being abused or appropriated by different people in order to be able to do what is known as state capture. So I think it was very systematic, but not spectacular. But at the same time, because of that, I think the evidence will count maybe more than some others with more spectacular evidence.
So I was saying, talking about connecting the dots. Do you think he's just laying the groundwork for that?
Yes, indeed so. And I mean, he's the author of this concept of linking the dots. It mentioned it many times in the past. And I think he also mentioned yesterday a very interesting point, and that is that he himself couldn't link the dots until the revelations of the Gupta emails became much better known, and that gave him the bigger picture, the bigger framework within which you could start to link the dots. And that is what, first of all, I think the Commission needs, is to have that solid evidence, the solid understanding of the context in which all of this happened, the institutional framework, and then to link the evidence that they receive from different people and will receive still to that. And I think that will give then a very credible framework or credible report ultimately of what we will understand by the notion of state capture.
It was interesting to see what was happening outside as well, Professor. What did you make of the EFF and Black First, Land First? You won't normally group them together, but seemingly they had something in common yesterday.
Well, they have a few things in common. The first one is that Pravin Gordhan is a major threat for them, because he is the one who exposes, who has more knowledge than maybe most other ministers about their involvement, their background, their sources of income. For example, that of the BLF. BLF is possibly the one which is most consistent in their approach. They accused him from the start as being involved in white monopoly capital or supporting it. In the case of the EFF, it's much more, I would say, opportunistic at this stage. But we know that the EFF, in the form of Floyd Shivambu with VBS Bank, the fact of Julius Malema's previous involvements in companies being investigated by the Hawks now, that all poses a threat for the EFF. And because we are approaching the election, it is hugely important for them to present themselves as still a solid party focused on anti-corruption, anti-state capture. And then at the same time, unfortunately, one of the common denominators is that they criticize Minister Gordhan that he's not black enough.
You know, they also call him enabler of state capture. If they have evidence, don't you think this is the perfect platform to come forward? The Deputy Chief Justice, Chairman of the Commission, is always calling for people who have evidence to come forward and speak to the Commission.
Well, the EFF has said in the past that they will, right at the end of the term of this Commission of Inquiry, will present themselves to the Commission and present their evidence. We will have to see whether in the end they do have evidence that will make a difference or will make an impact on the situation. At the moment, what it does is serves the purpose of saying, well, we have evidence, but we don't want to disclose it, and it becomes a bit of a extortion effect almost on many people. Create a sense of intimidation, I would say, for some, and that gives and that sense of expectation or of fear for some is what gives the power, the influence to the EFF in the current situation. But I think what we are seeing is that these demonstrations for me are side events They are not part of the mainstream of the Commission. It doesn't have an effect on the Commission at all. And I would say in terms of the national interest, we must focus on what happened inside and not outside.
So you say, Professor, it won't have any bearing, these protests won't have any bearing on the Commission. What about public opinion?
No, it won't. The point is what we are seeing is a very credible process by the Commission. There's no controversy involved in terms of their approach. They are very systematic. It's broadcast on a daily basis. There's absolute transparency about how the Commission is conducting themselves. We see that it is not abused by the evidence that's been presented by the witnesses so far. So I think there's a high level of credibility. The ultimate test for the credibility of the Commission ultimately will be its report. To what extent the report will have content, will have real substance, will make real recommendations that the President and maybe the investigative institutions like the Hawks and later the NPA can act on. That will be the real test, and not what is being said or the rumors that are being distributed by outside events.
Professor, from what you've seen so far, is the picture of state capture becoming more and more apparent or clearer or not?
I think the notion of state capture is a very complex concept per se, and yesterday there was a little bit of a debate between Minister Gordhan and the chairperson, Judge Zondo, and the leader of evidence, Paul Pretorius, about this concept of state capture. And I think there will be still a lot of debate about it in future, of exactly what is the content of this concept. But I think if we take everything together, the different processes that are unfolding, this commission in the first instance, the Nugent Commission about SARS, the parliamentary processes where there were the portfolio committees that investigated ESCOM and other parastatals or state-owned enterprises, the role of the media, especially the Gupta emails. If we put all of that together, plus the books that have been published by Jacques Poe and others, then over time I think we are going to have a very comprehensive understanding of what state capture in the context of South Africa means.
You know, Professor, you mentioned that, that these proceedings are transparent, it's being broadcast live, so I guess optics become heightened, isn't it? From your watching, from your reading, what do you think about Minister Gordhan's demeanor yesterday? How did he come across?
He was very calm, maybe some would say calculated, very systematic in his approach. He took the commission through, for example, the role of the minister, the role of the Treasury and the Ministry of Finance very systematically, quite similar to that of the former Deputy Minister Jonas, Mcebisi Jonas, and also some of the officials that testified earlier on. So I think what he wants to do is take away any sense of controversy, any sense of that he is trying to settle scores with other people and to try to present as best as possible the information that he has available. Yeah. I think this is a very conscious approach from his side in order to also maintain his credibility, that he is not pulled into controversies or side issues that might take away his attention from, I would say, his main message.
Professor Dirk Kotze, political analyst, we thank you very much indeed for your insight.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on now.